Welcome to Easy Style with Sammy. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each episode, I invite a friend, family member, colleague, or just someone I've met on this journey called life to come and share their personal style and approach to business, parenting, life, and everything in between. You'll hear motivational and inspirational stories that will help you refine and build your own personal style. Remember, style is easy when it comes from within. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Easy Style with Sammy. Today, my guest is Emily Mendenhall. Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great to see you, Sam.
It is. I know Emily and I have known each other, I think, since like fresh out of the womb, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, haven't necessarily kept in close contact for a while, but I have loved following all of the things that you're doing, the beauty of social media. So I'm super excited to have you here to be able to reconnect because of this podcast and just for you to kind of share your unique experiences with the listeners.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk about how we balance these crazy paths we follow. So
exactly. Yes. And yours is a unique one, and I love it. I'm so excited to hear about it. So why don't you just start by kind of introducing people to who you are?
Well, my name is Emily Mendenhall, and I am a professor at Georgetown University. I'm also a mom of 2 girls, 7 and almost 10. And I've been living in the Washington, D.C. area for the last 10 years. But between the 10 years from living in Okoboji, Iowa, where Sammy and I grew up, and moving to D.C., I lived in Chicago, Atlanta, North Carolina, India, South Africa. I had a daughter in the UK. I had a daughter in D.C. And we've traveled pretty extensively because a lot of my research is on global health. So it's been a pretty wild ride.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I'm so excited to talk to you because we've had so many conversations about moms and how our career paths kind of ebb and flow within our stage of life with our kids. And like you just mentioned, you've lived and traveled all over the world while getting married, while having kids, while finishing your PhD, like while doing all the things. Was that something you always wanted to do, was kind of travel the world? Was it because of the work that you were doing, or is it like a combination of all of the things?
Yeah. I've always been a deeply curious and nosy person. And I think I'm by training, I have a PhD in anthropology, and anthropologists are notoriously very nosy because we're always asking, why, what do you think about that? Why did you do that? And it's kind of, our bread and butter of our field is really getting to the nitty gritty of how things are in the world and how things work. And so I was drawn to that discipline partly because of my curiosity, I think. But I've always had the bug. I traveled a lot as a kid with my family. Even though we lived in rural Iowa, my grandmother was from London. So I spent quite a bit of time in places that were less familiar, maybe to some of our classmates just because of that exposure. So I've always had some wanderlust, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and your husband also travels a lot for his work.
Yeah, so my husband's I'm a professor at Georgetown in international affairs, and he is a professor at Hopkins in global health. He does a lot of health policy. So we're both traveling quite a bit. Through COVID, it's really changed. We do a lot less traveling. He actually particularly travels a lot less after COVID, which is awesome because it's really stressful to not have family nearby. My family all lives in Iowa. I have one cousin who's amazing, but also has a really busy life.
Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of support with our kids. We've had to do a lot of it on our own, and we haven't had, we had an au pair briefly during COVID, but we haven't had a lot of help. So
yeah,
it's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. But what is that like when you're traveling all over the place? I mean, a lot of people would maybe say, well, we're going to pause on having a family. We're going to wait until we get through maybe like these research projects. Like what was it with the two of you? Was it just, we're just going to do this and travel with our kids and just make that part of our lifestyle? Like, how did you approach that?
Yeah. Well, partly my sister was having kids and we wanted to have kids about the same time. So that was part of it. But also, yeah, we didn't. So a lot of academics are having, so I just turned 40 this year, as you probably
Yes.
did. And, a lot of my friends are having kids now. And I used to joke, about being, in DC considered almost a teen mom. Like I was so young because I was 30 when I had my first kid. And in DC, it's like 40, 45 when people have their first kid compared to home when people are like 20, early 20s having their first kids. So there's a really big cultural divide, and I was kind of straddling those two worlds. But I got pregnant in South Africa, interviewed for jobs in DC, and then had my daughter in London. And so I had this like very transnational pregnancy, but that's just exemplary of our life.
Yeah.
My eldest had her first birthday in Nairobi, and then my second one, like I've spent so much time alone or with Adam traveling to, especially I was doing a lot of work in Johannesburg, South Africa when my kids were really young, and I would actually take them and stay with a good friend. Actually, Julie and Molly Powers' cousin Moira lived in Johannesburg, and we would crash with
Wow.
them, and sometimes for a couple of months for work. So that was really amazing to be able to share those moments of early childhood. But, you can't really do anything without a village. So I really depended on friends and colleagues in different places where I've gone. Actually, when we were in Nairobi for about 4 months, when Fiona was 10 months to 14 months, we lived with friends as well, and shared their nanny. And it was really, really, really cool.
I think that's got to be just like some of the most incredible memories and experiences that you could never have. Like, what would you say to parents that are nervous, even just about taking a trip, like, let alone like, let's pretend COVID isn't a thing. We're not worried about all of the health issues or concerns about that with travel. Like, just kind of picking up your kids and not being afraid to take them to see the world, or even just like locally see the country, like travel the country. Like, do you have any tips or things that kind of saved you in traveling with kids?
I just think everyone is different, right? Like some people really like to travel and some people don't. And
It's true.
I think it's just really fun. I constantly have the travel bug. I like to learn and work with people and be in different places. But I think if you're traveling with kids, just don't sweat it. Just act like they're humans.
Yeah.
They have different needs, and they're a little bit needier. I mean, my youngest for a long time when she was small, she like licked everything. So she had this licking problem. I'd be like, oh my God, Zoe, you're going to get Giardia. Stop licking that.
It's like you're in public health.
This is like not a lickable place. But I think, people worry about going to different places, but, there's a lot of uncertainty and lack of safety in the US, just as in other places. So, I don't know. There's beauty everywhere. And I think showing kids beauty across cultures and contexts and people is really important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I, like you, was very fortunate. We traveled a ton growing up. And I think it definitely gives you a different perspective on how big the world is, but also at the same time how small it is. Like, I love that, like, you were staying with family, friend, adjacent people in South Africa. Like, how random is that? Yeah. That's super cool.
Yeah, and I was just in Amsterdam actually last week giving a talk, and I played hooky from this workshop I was supposed to be at for a day to see them because they just moved to Amsterdam from Johannesburg.
Oh,
so
wow.
You have these friends moving all around the world who you can connect with. It's really special.
Do you think your kids have the travel bug? Do you think they'll be the same as they get older, that they'll be like, okay, when are you guys going to take us somewhere? Let's go somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty good travelers now. The problem is they just want to put like stuffies in their suitcases, and like, you need underwear. You can't just bring stuffies. They're like, but this is all I have. I don't have room for underwear. And I'm like, but you got to take out a stuffy. So I think they'll get to be better packers, but they're super flexible, which I think is, it's really good.
Yeah. Okay, so let's flip gears a little bit, because you mentioned you're professor in international relations. You've got a whole public health background. You wrote a book about COVID and kind of how all of that plays out in our small community, which is a fantastic read. We'll link that up in the show notes. But kind of, as you're thinking about like research and things that you're working on, like where is kind of your next place that you're excited to learn more about?
Yeah, well, I actually I didn't share this with you, but I just got a Guggenheim Fellowship, which is giving me a year to write and read and reflect. And I'm going to try to take a little break. I've been working really hard for the last 20 years on my career, and I'm really tired. And so I'm writing a book. I'm actually working on two books right now, but I'm just don't need to do. I won't be teaching or doing all this service that professors do for the institution. So I'm really thrilled about that.
Congratulations.
And my kids are like, well, first of all, Zoe kept saying, "Mommy got a Googleheim," and everyone's like, "What is this Google thing?" I'm like, "No, it's not that." But it was really funny, and they're like, "Well, you're not working next year, so we don't ever have to go to aftercare." And I was like,
No.
It's like, well, kind of, I guess, maybe not. But it's just really funny. But I'm working on two books. Actually, I have a book that's written that I'm trying to find a publisher for that's about my great grandmother who was a spy during the Irish Revolution, the Irish War of Independence. And it's the story that my uncle, who unfortunately passed away 15 years ago, did all this digging into our genealogy. So he did his side of his family, and it took 2 months. Then he did his wife's side of the family, her maternal side, and he was like, "What is this?"
Oh,
He had
my
to hire a
goodness.
private investigator. We found out when my grandmother was 96 that she'd been living with a secret identity for 7 decades.
You're
So, so
that's like proof that truth is stranger than fiction. Like you can't make that up.
It is an amazing story. And I have been, really loving the story. And I kind of grew up with this story. So we would go, my uncle was doing this research as I was a young person, and I knew my great grandmother. I spent quite a bit of time with her, which is why we were going to London when I was little. And so it's just a wonderful story, a very intense story. And so I wrote the book and I'm trying to publish it. And so that's one piece. It's been really fun to work with historical fiction, which is, there's a lot I've had to kind of create, and it's a lot of dialogue. So that was a really fun genre to work in. And I'm also writing a book on long COVID. Which is what the Guggenheim is for. And I have a piece in Scientific American that came out actually last week. And I have a few other kind of pieces I'm working on as I'm writing and doing research for this book. So if anyone has long COVID or is working on long COVID, send me a message. It's been really just a powerful experience to do this work. And, I've been studying chronic illness and the interplay between trauma and chronic illness for a really long time. And what long COVID does is it opens the space to think about contested conditions when people don't feel believed, when their conditions aren't, what does it mean to legitimate your suffering, and what is long COVID, what isn't? So I'm kind of dealing with all these questions and really looking at people's stories to untangle them.
What I love about, I think, to your approach, like when I listened, and I don't have the name of your book on the top of my head. Unmasked, thank you. But when I listened to it, what I loved about it was like you can definitely feel the anthropological storytelling side of your brain with like the scientific research side. Like you do such a great job of not just making it a clinical thing, like, hey, here's the things that happen, but interweaving all of those stories into it to make a beautiful book. I think you're really good at that. And so it's interesting the two different types of books, that like the one you just finished and the one you're working on, because it seems like it's just a good mix of how your brain operates, but all digging back to what you said at the very beginning, which is I'm a very nosy person and just want to like uncover all of these things and learn all this stuff.
Yeah, it's so fun. Honestly, writing the fiction book was a huge challenge. The first draft was terrible, but I was trying to untangle all the details. And actually, when you read it, it is historical fiction because some of it I had to make up, but it's almost all true.
Mm-hmm.
It's all based on truth, and a lot of the actually story is documented in my uncle's extensive data. I mean, I actually had this huge suitcase in London, and last summer I went in June before my kids were out, my mother-in-law came down, and I went to London for a week and sat in my cousin's place in Surrey and went through this huge suitcase of data and letters and documents. And I copied some of it. My aunt also had a bunch of the documents. But then we went and we interviewed like all these nuns who some of them knew my grandma, like so fun. And we interviewed one of her landlords and went through this whole space. It was just amazing to do that. And I did it with my mom's cousin, actually. And it was just really fun to dig into that family story. So
what an incredible experience. Like how most families, like my grandma was really big into genealogy, and luckily years before she passed, put books together for us on like our whole family history, our family tree. So we have that we can go back. But most people aren't that lucky, and they don't have all of that stuff to kind of pass down. And I think those stories are so critically important and similar to just your zest for travel. Like we got to take my kids to Taiwan right before COVID, and they got to meet family and actually experience that culture. Now they're obsessed and they're mad that they're not more Chinese, like DNA, but they definitely identify with that part of their body. So I think that's really cool that you have that and that you can continue to, I mean, what fun stories to share with your girls. So that, you know, really your great grandmother was a spy. Like, like who has those stories to share? I love that. Well, you know, as you kind of think about this transition now from busy into like being able to work on a passion project, like how do you think that shift is going to happen? Like, what are you excited about? What are you nervous about? Because that's a big shift in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. Well, usually the summers are a little bit more relaxed. Being a professor has a big perk of not teaching in the summer. I mean, some people do teach in the summer, and I'm really, really fortunate that I'm a tenured full professor. And so I have a lot of job security and you know, a lot of people in academia don't have these days. It's a very difficult kind of changing work environment. But I'm very lucky in my position. And so in the summers, I often have some writing, usually actually right now. I guess the big difference is usually right now in this month between finishing teaching at the beginning of May and when my kids are out of school in mid-June, because in Maryland, my kids go to school in Maryland, and they don't finish school until mid-June. So it's like 17th or 16th of June is their last day, which is earlier than in Iowa. Or later than in Iowa. And I have 6 weeks basically every year to do my big bulk of writing. So if I'm going to do a new piece or something, it's like my time to have this really intellectual time and to focus. And then maybe the rest of the summer, I'll kind of work on it when I have some childcare, which is kind of spotty throughout the summer. But this summer, I just don't feel any urgency. I have this time and space. I have an entire year to do all of this, more than a year. So it honestly is really calming and relaxing, and it feels like a huge, huge change. Nice.
Yeah, no, that's super. I'm excited for you for that. I think it's interesting when we shift into a new dynamic. Like I know for us, shifting from, you know, having our schedule going through COVID when the schedules were all flipped around and now we're working and homeschooling to moving to a new, like every time there's a shift in the schedule, it's like you have to find that new energy and that new kind of the new normal, which for us has happened almost every year for the last 4 or 5 years. We have to find a new schedule and a new routine, but that's fun that you get the time and space to kind of figure out what do you want that to be and dictate that for yourself. And you know, let's go to aftercare because you're just going to be a mom all the time.
Yeah. And in July and most of August, my kids aren't going to be in camps. And, you know, in this, like in our kind of culture of child care, it was when we have 2 working parents, you know, most kids are in camps all summer. And so I just want my kids to have some downtime. We have really busy schedules. They're in so many activities. They're in dance. They both play the violin. They do sports. And, you know, we just want to have some downtime and playtime all summer. So I'm hoping it goes well.
I think that's so good. Yeah. And we'll actually get to hang out this summer because we'll both be in the same place for quite some time.
Yeah. I'm hoping Lori can help teach my kids how to ski. I'm not that good.
I never learned how to ski. And in fact, funny story. And Lori was on the podcast earlier, so I'll link up her episode in the show notes as well. But I was boating with Lori, and her dad was going to teach us how to water ski. So we had the water skis that have like the rope between them, and he started us off from the beach. And so I was sitting on the beach. I had the ski rope, And he's like, okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Well, we went and I got scared, let go, and happened to fall like just on my butt. Like it wasn't bad on a rock. But I was like, yeah, nope, done. I might have been like, I don't know, 7 or 8. I wasn't that old, but I'd never done it since then.
That's scary though. I mean, those kinds of experiences as a kid can really throw you off. My
Yeah.
kids, we took my kids downhill skiing for a weekend at like Liberty Mountain, in Pennsylvania. It was a very, us growing up in the Midwest, you can drive to Colorado or something, but
Right.
and this is fake snow, wasn't that? But we had so much fun. And I think my kids are ready to ski, but I've been wakeboarding forever, for like 30, like we just stopped skiing at some point, just wakeboarded.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what Lori and Aaron do, but I'm hoping that they can help my kids ski because I think they're really ready for it. And they're so good. So,
well, I think it's almost easier to have somebody else teach your kids some of those things, because like we as parents give off, whether we mean to or not, a certain energy about like nervousness or excitement or like pressure, whatever. So to have somebody else do it, it's like, okay, like I'm going to listen, or like, I don't want to listen to I can do it myself. I can do it my way. Right. Having somebody else can really help make it a little bit of an easier process, I think, in all things.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Okay.
Fingers crossed, right? We're getting ready to start to teach my daughter how to drive. And
oh my God.
It's terrifying. And she doesn't want to do it. And so like there's already a whole bunch of anxiety. So we'll see how it goes.
Does she need to? Like is she 15?
She'll be 15 in December, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So she's got to do driver's ed. And we told her, you have to learn to drive. Even if you don't want to drive on a regular basis, you need to learn, because it would be like in case of an emergency, like you need to be able to either get somewhere or take someone somewhere, or like you just need to learn to drive. It's a skill you need to learn. So yeah. I'll keep you posted on how that one goes. Okay. Well, Emily.
Are you practicing on like the back roads, or how are you? I mean, I was a terrible driver at 15 and 16.
So was I.
I'm terrified of my kids driving. I mean, and we live like by big roads, like in Okoboji and around, Lakes area. It was like rural roads. It wasn't even hard driving, and I had a hard time. Right. So,
well, she can't, in Minnesota, you can't get your permit till you're 15. So she's not learning to drive yet. But yes, I remember driving for the first time out on our property, and we just drove around in the grass and like did it. Like that's where I drove for the first time. So we'll see. I mean, I think maybe we'll take her down to Okoboji and have her drive around down there. We live in the burbs, and so there's a lot of like we can drive through the neighborhood here, and she won't have to get on any major roads. But no, yeah, learning to drive in the cities is a very different beast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, here's the paths you can take so you don't have to go on any major roads. And we live really close to their schools, and we'll see. But it's a whole nother thing. I don't know who's going to teach her to drive, because I know we're going to be sitting in that seat anxious, and she's going to feel it. And be like, I can't do this. Nope, no worries.
Oh, okay.
Wrong pipe. Okay. Well, I so appreciate you showing up and sharing your story, your experience. I think you are so inspirational because, like you said, you've accomplished a lot at 40 years old in your career. And I'm so excited for the things that are coming up in your Guggenheim Award. I love that. But I would love to wrap this up with the same 5 questions we ask every guest, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so where do you go for either personal development or if you are looking for a resource to learn more? And I know you're an academic, so that's probably a very different question for you than how I ask most people.
Yeah, I read a lot, obviously. When I was having Fiona, I read 20 books on natural childbirth and then had a C-section. So I was like, there's lots of things that, I read until I get something and feel comfortable. So that's a huge part of me. I'm always reading parenting books. My oldest daughter has anxiety and ADHD. So I've read a lot of work on ADHD and anxiety in children. I've been reading Dr. Becky. Sorry. Kennedy's book, Good Inside, recently. It is one of the best parenting books I've ever read. I'd really recommend everyone looking at that. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Usually I run or walk every day and I listen to podcasts, either about the news or about mindfulness, or I do some meditations. I also have had a yoga practice for 25 years. That is really important and grounding for me. Without my yoga practice, I would just not be centered. I practiced Ashtanga for a long time, but my studio closed. So I've been practicing like hot power yoga. And I used to hate hot yoga. I went to a Bikram class and like walked out once because I was like, I hate this. But there's something I think about our hormones and our bodies in midlife when they start shifting and changing. And I love it now. It's like,
interesting.
10 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I'm not doing that. That's the worst thing. It's like, but I really love it. It's been really grounding for me. I also do a lot of pottery. So I'm part of pottery. So one of the ways I do mental health, like say it's like the cheapest therapy, is there's this community. Sorry, there's a lot of pollen right now.
Yeah.
And there's it's called Glen Echo Park. It's actually a national park, but it's an art studio and an art space. And we live really close to it in DC. And my kids do Irish dance there, and they do Suzuki violin.
Yeah.
My husband does a bunch of music, but they have tons of art. And Nixon actually was having this big event in the mall, which he canceled right away. And he had these big yurts that were on the mall and they needed to get rid of. And this guy, Jeff Kirk, who's the head of the pottery studio, got wind of this, and they were just setting up Glen Echo Park as a national park. And so he ran down and he got all of his buddies to move the yurts to the park. So I go once a week and do pottery, thanks to Hank Hall, with like all the retireds. And I tell everyone I'm in meetings. And it's like the important thing for my mental health is to just get my hands in the clay and center myself. I actually had to take a break this winter from my pottery. I'm going to start again this summer because I organized the 4th grade play, and it took, oh my God, all this time.
The opposite of mental health.
The opposite of mental health time. But it's really important to support my daughter.
Yeah, of course.
It was so much work. Oh my God, these PTAs, they are running on unpaid labor of working moms. I've got to say, that is my opinion. Whatever.
I'm sure you're not alone in that feeling.
Oh my God. And it's always like the busiest moms who are running things. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm the worst mom volunteer on the planet.
It's anyways, this is what I've learned the last several years.
This is what I've learned. My takeaway. Okay, would you consider yourself to be an introvert or an extrovert?
Oh my God, I figured out that introverts get exhausted by being around other people when I was like 30. I was like, why are you so tired? Yeah. I am like such an extrovert, like to an extreme. Like I'll finish teaching a class for 2.5 hours and just be like so amped. And then I'll talk with my students for like an hour outside of the classroom because they like have all these questions. I'm like, yeah, let's keep going. You know, and I talk to other colleagues who finish teaching. They're so tired. They have to go hide in their office and take a nap. I'm definitely an extrovert.
Definitely an extrovert. Yes. What is something that's on your goal list for this year, either personal or professional?
I really want to learn how to make a teapot. I am really a bad potter. So one of the really good things about pottery for me is I'm really bad at it. Like I do fits and starts. So I'll do it for a while. And then like I did it in high school and then I did it when I was doing my PhD and now I'm back doing it. I'm not very good, but I really love it. So it's really good to be in love with a project or something that you're very bad at, especially if you're good at, I mean, I'm bad at a lot of things, but this is something that I enjoy working with and growing with. And for me, I love making pottery, and I wish I was better at and enjoyed more the finishing process because like to produce the pots, it just feels so good in my body and it's so relaxing and good for my mental health. So I'm going to focus a little bit more and learn how to make a teapot, which is very, very hard. I mean, ask Sheila, Gamble, Hank Hall, like they're amazing. Yeah. They're some of my inspirations, but for me, it's more about my mental health. But I do want to make a teapot. It's my goal.
I love that because it's like the no pressure. Like it's just something you can just do. The outcome doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah, it's about process
Yeah.
and it's about, it's really good.
What's a piece of advice that someone has given you or you've heard somewhere that has kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, I saw that question. I was wondering if it should be, I guess actually one piece of advice is don't put things on hold in your life for your work. And that is something we did, is that we had kids when people were like, you're having kids? And then, and I was like, yeah. And then I had another one and people were like, what are you doing? You're on the 10-year track, you're teaching, you're doing this stuff. Like, why are you having kids now? And, honestly, it was really hard. And I don't think I slept for a really many, many years very well. But I'm really glad that we did it when we did, and I didn't listen to anyone else. But, some advice that I did have was just like, walk to the beat of your own drum.
Yeah.
Really, if it's time, you don't have to do what people tell you, and don't let people scare you. Everyone always talks about these doomsday things or tries to use fear as a motivator, and I don't really buy into that. I think that, I have an incredibly supportive and largely equal partnership, so it's enabled me to maintain my career and my family. Without that, it's ebbed and flowed. But without that, it would have been almost impossible to do what we've done. And we spend so much time with our kids. Like, I don't really have a social life beyond my family, which, some people like that and some people don't. But they're like my everything.
Yeah. And I think that's great advice, even coming from somebody like you who's in the public health space, who does see some of the worst of what could be out, like what's out there, right? Like you see a lot of things that aren't rosy and happy. So I think that's great that you have that perspective and that you share that perspective. That's super awesome. Okay. And you've already shared some of these, but what would you say is a non-negotiable for you in your life?
Family time, maybe,
Yeah.
like work-life balance, bedtime. Like, I do most mornings. My husband works in Baltimore, so it's like a 50-hour drive. So when he goes to work, there, or 50-minute, not hour, but 50 hours.
Very dramatic.
Hour. So if he goes at 5 a.m, it's like 50 minutes.
Yeah.
But if he goes during rush hour, like after drop off or whatever, it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours. So he usually goes really early and then comes back at like 3. So I usually do mornings, but like that's just precious time. So because I have the privilege of owning my time and really negotiating it, I don't really have meetings before 9:30 or 10. So I like do my morning with my girls. You drop them on the bus. I go for a run or walk with my dog, and then I'll get ready for meetings. And sometimes I wake up at 6 and do some work if I need to, but before they wake up. But time with my girls is really non-negotiable. Like, people ask me to do stuff after 5 p.m. and I'm like, I don't have childcare. I'm not doing that. And I don't go to a lot of evening things. And when my kids are in 10 years, my kids are going to be gone. Oh my God. It's like heart-wrenching. They leave you. And I'm not halfway through my career. I will have many years that I can go to night events and I can host distinguished people and do all that stuff. And so really having boundaries with my family matters. Otherwise, you can just fill your time all day long with all sorts of things. And, everything can seem I really should do that. But honestly, and I actually try to perform prioritizing my kids and perform being a mother in the public or in my workspace a lot. People will email with like 25 people, like, we expect you to be here at 6 p.m. to do this. And I'll respond all and like, I'm so sorry, I have to take my kids to their piano lesson or whatever, their fiddle lesson or, their swim practice. That's not a time that works for me. And I think it's important that, especially as a professor, and I talk a lot about this with my students, it's important to perform balance and to say, that's my time. That's my time. You don't own all of my time. We're all about productivity, efficiency, and work in America, but I'm a human and I have people who depend on me and they deserve that. So, really being explicit with that. I guess that's what I'm probably most fierce about is that time.
Well, that's such a good lesson in that we teach people how to treat us. We can set our own boundaries, and we have to always advocate for ourselves in whatever way makes the most sense. So I think, yes, that is beautiful. And I love that you use that as an example also, because I think a lot of times I try to eliminate should out of my vocabulary, but I think a lot of times too, we feel the pressure. So it's almost like bringing the piece of advice that you had, which is like, don't let people scare you into doing things.
Yeah.
Like, them saying this is the expectation and you saying, well, that just doesn't work for me. Let's figure out something else. Like, is 100% okay. But we often feel nervous to advocate for ourselves in that way because of the repercussion. So I love that you shared that. And I think that's a great way to kind of wrap things up. Plus my dog is about ready to lose her mind. I'll be right there. Emily, if people want to connect with you, check out more about your book, Unmasked, or kind of stay, in contact with you so they can see about all these other awesome projects you're working on, how do they do that?
You can get my contact information and info about my books and interviews and stuff on emilymendenhall.com. There's a bunch of information there, so check it out. And you can click to a bunch of my op-eds if you want to read smaller tidbits. But there is an audiobook, as you mentioned, which is kind of fun.
Yep, I love it. Well, I so appreciate you being here, and we'll link all of that up in the show notes. But Emily, thanks for coming on and being a guest.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Sammy. It's so wonderful to share this space with you.
It was so great being able to catch up with Emily on today's episode. I hope that she inspired you to really just make decisions for yourself. There's the path that everyone else travels, but you walk to the beat of your own drum, and trust your intuition and trust what you want for yourself, your family, and your life, even if it means doing things a little bit differently or on your own terms. You can grab the show notes for this episode at easystylewithsammy/24. But thank you again to Emily so much for joining me on this episode. Subscribe wherever you listen, please, please, please. And I'd love it if you'd leave us a review. It helps us get in front of more people that might want to listen to a podcast like this. But for now, I'll see you in the next one.